Hi everybody, thanks ever so much for coming out this evening. My name's Caroline Eden, I'm a local book critic, author and journalist, and I am so excited to be joined tonight by Kate Young, who, this is the first time we've met, but we've been
very nice.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say fans of each other's work.
Yeah, no, genuinely.
I'm a mega fan for many years, and we're really excited to be here with you all to celebrate the launch of the little library Parties.
Yes.
Which is Kate's latest book, the fourth book.
Yeah.
The fourth book. So I've got lots of questions to ask. There will be time for questions at the end, so please have a think about anything you'd like to ask Kate, and we'll come round with a mic to ask questions. There's also a live recording, so we'll be getting questions from there as well. Right. So without further ado, I might kick off because I've got a lot to ask.
Go for it.
Can we start by giving Kate a warm welcome?
Oh, guys. Thank you, and hello.
Right. When I was reading your book again the other day, I've read all of them, I've got the whole set. You were talking about what makes a party and why it's quite a difficult thing to define. Now, I'd never thought about this. Can you tell us what a party is?
Yes, I think a party is when you go to somebody else's house and they wash up. So I was kind of, when I decided on the title for the book and the concept for the book, my friend Berta, who lives in Stroud and who, because of a very weird, horrible thing that happened to her where she passed out in the street and cut her head open, ended up moving into my house for lockdown, for the first one. And so she and I talked about food a lot, and we talked about having people round a lot because we weren't able to do anything, obviously, we were all in that situation. And so I had a moment with her where I was like, what is a party though? Like, what is the difference between having somebody round for dinner and having a party, and how do I define those things? Because I have people round for dinner all the time, and it feels distinctly different from the moment that you want to organise a party or have a party or host. And so we decided, and she came up with it, so I'm crediting her here for that reason. She decided that the big difference was that you wash up. So if somebody comes around for dinner and at the end of the night, you wash up together, or somebody picks up their plate and takes it into the kitchen, or somebody sorts their own thing out, that is somebody coming around for dinner. That's a different thing to a party.
Right, okay, I love that. Because your book is sort of structured in a particular way, isn't it? You've got different sections. Can you talk us through the different sort of types of parties that are in the book?
So every time I do a book, I am quite technical in my creativity. So every book starts with a spreadsheet, which I think horrifies a lot of friends of mine who are deeply creative in a very different sense. I love a number. I love a structure. I love a pattern. I love fitting things together. And I think I've created over the past 5 years, in the nicest possible way, a real rod for my own back in this sort of concept of food and fiction and bringing those two things together. Because I can't just put a recipe in a book, it needs to come from somewhere and be inspired by something.
Right.
And so the way that I do things is basically spend a lot of time before I've sat down to structure the book or write the book, reading and collecting little moments in books where people have something that I want to eat, where things happen, where it feels like a rich space for something that will inspire a dish. And so when I sat down and looked at all of the parties that I'd collected, I basically could divide them up into garden parties, dinner parties, tea parties, wedding parties, and house parties. And so that ended up being the structure of the 5 chapters. And then it's just about going about 10 recipes in each chapter because they wanted about 50, and then sort of making it work. But essentially having kind of 30 or 40 in each of those sections, and then narrowing it down to the ones I really wanted to make and eat.
Because your book before was Christmas, and I was fascinated by, I'm not a Christmas person, but Kate made me like Christmas. It's honestly...
It's like my proudest thing about that book, to be honest, is Caroline's message of I'm not a Christmas person, but
really not
you
a
know
Christmas
what?
person.
I'm here for it.
It's such a nice book. It's for sale at the front, please. If you're like me, buy a copy. It will change your mind about Christmases. But I was thinking with parties, we've had the little library year, we had Christmas, now you've got parties. Why parties and not say, because I was thinking I'd quite like to do, if I was you, holidays.
I did contemplate holidays. That is a word that I contemplate. But, so what I wanted to do was to celebrate moments that don't sort of have a real tentpole in them. And I think particularly after doing Christmas, I wanted to be able to write about moments that don't look like they're going to be a big deal and actually end up being the best night of your year. Like I wanted it to be a sort of celebration of, hey, all of these people have come around and there's not really a reason for it. It's just because we wanted to have a party this weekend. Whereas holidays, I felt like I would then have to look for all the Thanksgivings in literature and the, you know, all of the other moments in literature. And I really like the bits that aren't moments, that sort of just happen. And I like that in real life. That sounds very lame, but I like that in real life too, the sort of nights that you don't think are going to be a thing and then really are.
No, I love that.
So I wanted to do like a thing that felt broader in a way that allowed me to really celebrate fun and joy, and that didn't have to be... I loved writing Christmas, but I have really complicated feelings around Christmas.
Most people do.
And I sort of have really complicated feelings for a bunch of different reasons, some of which are my sort of blood family, my birth family lives on the opposite side of the world. In my surrogate family, we had a significant death a couple of years ago of somebody who really loved Christmas and was the real heart of Christmas in our house. And so it's a really complicated holiday to write about. And I wanted to write about joy. Yeah. And parties felt like a thing I could write about that was just joy.
And the other thing I thought, I was having lots of thoughts reading,
okay.
But I was also thinking like pandemic, the pandemic, which is still ongoing. It made me think, was this book based a bit on longing? Was it based a bit on the times you missed having people around? Because you're such a social
100%,
person.
yeah, absolutely.
So did the pandemic play into that
Massively. So I wrote a whole other book that will never be published, a whole other cookbook.
Isn't that incredible? Can we just say?
Yeah. It will never be published. There are some recipes that made it into parties because they existed and I loved them and they actually were from parties, so it made sense. But I wrote a whole other book and I sent it to my editor. I did the whole thing. Wow. It wasn't just like I wrote a book and then decided it wasn't great.
Just put it in a drawer.
No. I was like, I wrote a book and I was committed and we were thinking about, and then the pandemic happened. I was, so just before everything shut down, the week before, I was supposed to fly to Australia to photograph it. Like it was deep in.
Right.
We were really ready.
So you signed the papers.
Oh yeah. It was a big thing. Huh. And it was another, so the last two of my books have been this size, which I adore. Yeah. But it was another big one. So it was another 100 recipe cookbook, a big thing.
Was it around the world?
Yep.
I remember you talking about it.
Yeah, of course. I got to midway through the pandemic. We couldn't photograph it because I have many skills. Most of them are food related, but none of them are taking the photographs for a big, beautiful cookbook.
Much harder than it looks.
I can do stuff on Instagram. I make food look fine. But Lean, who photographed my first 3 cookbooks, and Yuki, who did this one, make my food look extraordinary. Yeah. And I cook it. I don't have a home economist on set, so I do all the cooking for the books. But I definitely don't do the photography, and I couldn't have done it on my own. So we were kind of in this limbo of just waiting I couldn't do it. I really wanted Lean, who is my friend from Australia, who's photographed the first 3, to photograph it. And as that was all happening, I was like, is anyone going to want a book of fiction from around the world? And it just became less and less a thing I wanted to talk about. And suddenly I couldn't get to all these countries that I was supposed to go and travel to and that the plan had been to go to, of course. And so I just felt like there was no real authenticity in me writing that book.
But
it didn't feel like it was coming from a good place. Yeah. It felt like it didn't feel like the right book. Yeah. And so I've forgotten what the question was.
No,
I'm really
sorry. This
is
very interesting.
So I basically, I didn't want to write that book. And instead, the pandemic was happening. I wanted to have people around. I was living on my own for the first time. I bought a flat in mid-2019 and moved in on my own for the first time.
In Stroud?
In Stroud. Yeah. And I've had a lot of very living situations. Some great. I lived with Tom for a while. But so some fantastic, some really great flatmates, but I was a nanny for a while, so I was in a house that wasn't mine. And so there've been a bunch of different living situations over the years, and I was thrilled. I was like, all I've ever wanted is a massive dining table to have people around and celebrate and have parties and do all of that. And I bought this beautiful big dining table that seats 16 people, and then the world shut down and I couldn't have anyone or anything. And I sat there in my living room just looking at this massive elephant of eyesore of furniture, just going like, I can't do anything with this stupid table that's bigger than me. Like, they really struggled to get it up there. And I was like, what a waste. This is going to sit here for years.
On pause.
Right. And so
on ice.
I just wanted to write a book that was all the things I wanted to do around that table.
Yeah, no,
and it's really nice
sense.
that like the book, all the photography then happened in my flat. So the table is in
that is the table.
That is the table in all of the photos. Like it's a great thing. And I was able to use it. But yeah, it is a book of longing. It is a book of celebration and all of that. But it's
absolutely.
a book of like, God, if people could come round, this is what we'd do. And then thankfully, by the time we were photographing it, I could capture that, and that was true.
Right. I feel like we should go back to the beginning a bit before we carry on with the book. But you talk at the beginning in the introduction, I think, about your family parties and your mum back in Brisbane. Can you describe for us a bit what your first ever experiences of parties were like at home?
So my parents are quite different. They've been divorced since I was 5, and I grew up in 2 quite different houses, but both of them had a real sort of food love and focus. And I think my mum's house particularly was a real party house. And that was true from the time I was a very small child. So I grew up being able to hand around a plate of canapes and knowing how to pour a drink, because that is a thing that we did all the time. So it was a big focus as a kid and a big focus of our sort of weekends.
Yeah.
And the anticipation for those parties was as much fun as the parties themselves, because it would always be, we were going to try this recipe that we'd never tried before, and we were going to go and shop in this shop that we'd never been to before, or we were going to get up and go to the market early and get this ingredient that we were really excited about, because then it was going to be part of this dish. And it was a big sort of inspiration for what the book's become, and certainly how I live and invite people in and want to create, sort of want to be hospitable now. It was an extraordinary thing, and I think I was not very cool at school. It's not really very, very social. I kind of went to a few parties in my later years of school. I found my crowd when I was about 16, but it took me a long time to get there. And then I didn't really find my crowd until I got to university and then got to England. And so it wasn't that I was going to loads of house parties at teenagers' houses, but there were loads of parties happening around me. And then suddenly when I found my crew, it was kind of, actually, we've got a really nice house at home for parties. And then when I moved to England, we had this great, bizarre house with this enormous hallway and tiny rooms.
Was this in the city of London? Whitechapel?
Whitechapel. Oh my God, such a good memory.
I was like, that is a curious place. I can just, because I had Aussie friends. When I lived in London and I was working in the bookshop, my mates were all, not all, but a lot of Aussie girls. And Fulham Clapham.
Fulham Clapham.
And I was like, Whitechapel?
Those Australian girls moved to Fulham and Clapham.
Bridesmaids at my wedding.
Exactly. Like, that is what we do. And I think that I was very determined not to be that Australian girl. So I was like, East is not South or West. So I could go there.
Interesting location, yeah. But your mum had set you up, hadn't she? Because you talk in the introduction about the linens, and it's all there. It's all in your head, like what you want it to be eventually, your own hosting.
It's totally true. So I came over here with one backpack, and my backpack was filled with mostly quite crap clothes, none of which I have anymore, like 3 books, and...
Come on, what books? Do you remember 1 or 2?
Short story of Roald Dahl.
Right.
Like adult short stories.
Nice.
Which I bought at the airport. A book that was this is so weird. So my friend Hugh, who I've not seen in ages and ages, Hugh gave me a book because he thought I might enjoy it on the plane, and he had torn out the last 5 pages.
Oh my God, no.
Just so that I would think about him on the plane. And so I don't know how that book ends. It's like a pretty rubbish Ben Elton paperback.
Okay.
And I don't know how it ends. And I've been determined never to find out.
But you didn't leave it on the plane, which is what
I brought it off. I definitely brought it off. I had it in my hands. But 3 months after I arrived, my mum, at the same time as I'd got on the plane, had put a box of my stuff, a big cardboard box of my stuff, into a ship, which is how you get things cheaply-ish. It's never cheap from Australia. And it's all stuff for the house.
Right.
Like, it's like a glory box. Like sort of old Catholic thing where you collect things throughout your teenage years and put them all in a box. And so it's nice tablecloths and it's bits of crockery and it's all sorts of stuff that I had from childhood. Before I ever had a home, it was things to host with.
That's nice.
Yeah. So I've had loads of them since 2009, since I moved here.
And they're with you now in Stroud?
And they're with me now in Stroud. Yeah. They've gone to every like shared flat I've had.
Are they in the book? Some of the things?
Some of the things are in the book, yeah.
Okay.
So like some of the linen in there is my great-grandmother's linen that I've had since then, and yeah.
Because I always think with these books, people think, oh, it's just all props. But like when I do my books, they're things I've collected from my travels that are mine. I hand them over and they shoot them and it's the same, right?
It's the same thing. Like we shot, so I didn't realise this until we were shooting like my second book, I think, but nobody does it this way, which is that all of the people on the shoot are my friends.
That's nice.
I don't have a stylist.
Right.
I don't have anybody who does anything on the set apart from me and the photographer. Everybody who comes and does anything or helps out. So my friend Bryony set up loads of the set. My friend Ella did loads of the cooking. And apart from that, everybody who's in a photo is somebody I literally invited round for dinner because I was like, come for dinner and we'll probably take some photos of you. And so it's just a couple, I think we shot this one in 7 days. And so it's just 7 continuous days of about 5 recipes, between 5 and 8 recipes a day, where we then sit down and eat them.
Good days of eating.
Really good days of eating. Loads of days of leftovers. There's a whole wedding cake in there and we did eat it. So it is quite impressive how much food people can get through.
I love that.
Yeah.
We should also talk about the lovely fiction that's strewn through the book. So can you, maybe just because we haven't really talked about this yet, talk about how the fiction takes place in the book, and then you've got different authors, Kazuo Ishiguro, Catherine Mansfield, different authors. Can you talk us how you've selected them, name some of them,
totally.
why they're in there? So
the very first book that I did, Little Library Cookbook, was now 5 years ago, so it's 2017. And the books that were in that one, that book is 100 recipes from 100 different novels, and they are super specific. So it is this specific dish from this specific novel. It's exactly what you expect to find. And it's all the ones that people expect are going to be in there. So it's Bruce Bogtrotter's cake, it's honey cakes from Winnie the Pooh. It's all of the stuff that you're like, of course it's that. And it's super expensive. So I didn't realise this when I did the first book, but it was my responsibility as the writer to pay for all the quotes that we used.
Oh my God.
So my entire advance went on paying for all the quotes.
No.
It took me 2 years and about 14 grand to pay to have the quotes in the book.
Ouch.
Yeah. And when I signed the second book deal, I said, I will take less money if you handle it.
Totally.
And of course, the publishers were like, my publishers are amazing. They were like, of course we'll handle it, but you can't have as many quotes. And so suddenly it becomes a conversation of what do I want the quotes in the book to do then? Because what I love and what I've always been inspired by is reading in a novel of some fantastic meal and then going away and wanting to make it. But I knew from Year and in Christmas and in this one that we couldn't afford to have 50 quotes. We're not going to start every single recipe with a specific quote. And so it becomes much more like, what do I want those to do? And so in this book, the answer is vibe.
Right.
I very much wanted them to create an atmosphere, to give you a sense of how brilliant parties are. Some of them are food, some of them are like situations. So there's a beautiful quote from last night at the Telegraph Club about which is set in San Francisco in the 60s and is about a sort of queer community of Asian American women, basically. It's a gorgeous book, and the party, there's no real food at the party, but there is a party, and it's a real vibe. They go back there after they've been at a club all night. They go back and they dance and they drink and have a great time, and that is in the house party section because I want that energy to then tell you what you might want to eat, even though it's not a description of food. And so the parties then could become much more sort of free and open, and what do I want to do? And so, yes, there's the garden party, Catherine Mansfield, and there is one of Brandon Taylor's short stories in Filthy Animals, which I adore. This amazing collection. There's a quote from Remains of the Day, which is about tea parties and about tea, actually, and about the making of tea specifically and the having of tea between these people who have spent their lives making tea and are sitting down to have tea together. Because you say in the book,
if you drink tea, you should understand how it's made.
You should understand how it's made. You should understand, like, the fact that tea is this enormously complicated history that basically speaks of empire and speaks of us going into other countries and going, that thing, we'll take that. And then having people essentially be slaves and work for this thing that has become a massive part of our national identity. So I wanted to bring all of those things in, as well as the sort of joy and fun and specific dishes. So there's lots of references to parties and dishes and things like that, but that's why there's no longer a quote that opens each recipe.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that.
I cannot afford it,
Yeah,
and
no,
nobody else can either.
I mean, it's like music lyrics, isn't it?
Yeah,
Obviously,
exactly.
you can never quote a mute, but I didn't realise. Wow, okay.
I think I'd assumed that somebody had said to me at one point before I sold the book that there was a thing called fair usage.
Yeah.
That only works in academic texts where you're not making any money. No,
Right.
it's not that. So you can do it if you're not profiting off them.
Right.
So you can use a quote in a PhD thesis. You can use a quote in a text that goes into a school that you're not making money off. But if your book is a book sold in a bookshop, you have to pay for every quote, which you should. Of course you should. I'm not arguing that you shouldn't, but it's really expensive.
What's the best party in fiction? And why?
There's a lot. So there's
Your favourite?
My favourite. So there's a lot of really good ones in the book that I have a lot of fun with. I did an event at the British Library earlier this year where we talked about the fact that sometimes, particularly dinner parties, they're bad because there's no drama in a party that goes well. There's no drama, there's no like fictional joy in something that goes the way you want it to go. There is only drama when something goes wrong. So my favourite dinner party is Bridget Jones's because it's such a nightmare, it's such a shambles, and it's such a sort of failure of her own.
Is that the blue soup?
The blue soup. Like, the problem is not that she wanted to have people around for dinner. The problem is that she got a Marco Pierre White cookbook from the 90s and picked 3 recipes at random and basically is like making food that nobody wanted, like, no offense to Marco Pierre White, nobody wants to come to your house and eat that. They want to go out to a restaurant and eat it. They want you to roast a chicken. Like, they don't want you to, be slaving for 3 days over a dinner that nobody really fancies. So she's supposed to make this, seared, charred fish with fondant potatoes and a cherry tomato velouté and all of these other things. It's like, don't make a velouté. You're at home. Nobody wants a velouté.
No one knows what a velouté is.
No, exactly. So I love that because it reveals so much about all of those characters, because it's the moment that you go, Mark Darcy does really fancy her because he's here, he's in the kitchen, he puts an apron on, he helps.
Yeah.
I love those kind of parties. I love as well the one in Such a Fun Age, which is a nightmare dinner party that happens at Thanksgiving, where suddenly you realise that 2 people in the room have slept together and nobody really knows that, and it's all revealed, and it's like this tension-filled, horrible party. I love the dinner parties in, I love all of the food, but particularly the big family dinners in the light years in Elizabeth Jane Howard's Cazalet Chronicles, because you see them upstairs and you see all the food come up, but you also see downstairs and you see the cooks and you see their relationship with the garden and you see how they do it and you see what they're making. And I love the sort of interplay between upstairs and downstairs and how you see that. And then the best house party is like, it's Gatsby's party.
I was hoping you were going to say
so
that. We can't
mad
help
and
it.
incredible and just like to be hosting it all the time. It's not a one-off. He is doing it every weekend during the summer, hoping that Daisy comes across the water. And if she doesn't come across the water, that she at least looks across the water and sees that it's happening and has a bit of FOMO and is like, I could be at that party if I'd married him instead. Like, what an incredibly weird thing to commit your life to just decide that you're going to have this like lifetime of parties.
You can kind of imagine it happening.
Of course you can.
With the
if you
ultra
had tons
rich.
of money,
I mean, why
and
not?
like the woman that you love has married some loser, buying a house across the water and being like, maybe here.
Could have had that.
That's great.
This leads me very nicely onto my next question.
Good.
Where
I'm glad
I wanted
that's-
to ask you, you say in the book something like, if you've known me for more than 10 minutes, you'll know about the first wedding I ever catered for.
It was a nightmare.
We need to know about this
so
in detail.
In 2015, it must have been early 2015, I went out to dinner with my friend Lydia and she asked me to make her wedding cake. And then we got really drunk over dinner and she asked me if I wanted to cater the whole thing. And with the confidence of somebody who had never catered a wedding and had no idea what that would look like, I didn't ask how many guests or where would it be or is it in a field? I just said, yes, that sounds great. And then what I did next was send her a list of all of the things from cookbooks that I loved, like all my favourite recipes that I loved making at home. And she said, yes, instead of picking a couple. And so I just decided to do
everything.
All of it. So we counted it up.
How old were you?
It was 2015, so I was like 27. And we cooked. It was me and 5 pals. We were all injured in some way. So I had received a concussion the day before the wedding because I'd run into a fence pole with my head turned to the side so I could get under a tree, and I just smacked straight in. Anna had a broken arm. Mia was stung by a wasp, and she's the only one of us allergic, so her arm swelled up.
Oh my God.
Bryony had arthritic feet and couldn't walk on them. Tom was the only one who was like healthy enough to just walk around and do his own thing. But he was at a musician's camp until the day before, so he didn't come till the evening of. And he was supposed to be just doing washing up, but instead, the staff who arrived that I'd booked to come and be the wait staff, I'd never worked with a recruitment company before, and they, instead of sending the 5 promised wait staff, we got 3 teenagers who couldn't speak English.
Oh dear.
Who were amazing and lovely, but could not understand a literal thing we were asking them to do. They were all recently here from Romania and could not understand what we were asking, because of course they couldn't.
How stressful.
It was unfathomable. So we did 24 different canapes.
Whoa.
Like, just deranged. Why? Why? The stupidest thing I've ever done. Roasted a whole pig, did 6 shoulders and 6 legs of lamb, did 7 sea bass, did 40 stuffed aubergine, did 12 different salads.
What?
Did 22 different desserts.
Could you call this family dining? You say, like, my weddings are catered like family dining.
Yeah, they are now.
Wow.
They are much better at it now.
What family would that have been?
No. It was what it was is it had the air of like every individual dish was something you would put on the table at Sunday lunch.
Yes.
You just would never make 24 of them at once. So the general atmosphere and vibe was like, hey, it's just like if you came to mine for Sunday for 240 people.
Okay, wow, it was a big wedding.
It was a nightmare. It's the biggest wedding I've ever done.
Yeah. Were they happy at the end?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
They were great. They were thrilled. The bridesmaids had to help pour the beer when the staff didn't arrive and couldn't run the bar. But that was fine. And then there was wine on the table during dinner, so that we kind of got away with it. And then the worst bit was the next morning when we went back and everyone who was at the wedding thought I was there to make breakfast. And I was not yet boundaried enough to go, no, I'm actually just collecting my equipment and then going home.
For a rest.
And instead started making breakfast for everyone, to the point where my brother, who was on the team with me, had to come into the kitchen and be like, I will leave. I will leave you
He'd had
here.
enough.
Yeah, he was absolutely done.
That is brilliant.
It was an absolute shambles. And it is like, it's a story we tell all the time because I haven't even touched the surface of how insane the day itself was.
But there is a lovely section in the book on wedding parties.
Yes.
To give people ideas.
To give people ideas. I really wanted to include weddings because I think they're a beautiful thing to be able to include.
Big party.
It's a big party. The food should be great. It should be really fun. But I am not delusional enough to imagine that most people who buy my small cookbook are going to go, okay, so I'm going to use this as my basis for the 85-person wedding I'm catering next time. I hope so. That would be really lovely.
More than one.
I would love that, but I really think that most people aren't doing that. And so what I've done is scale down everything but the wedding cake, which I do think some people might make and would make. And I think that that's a thing where you could quite reasonably, if you're a baker who loves to bake, I cooked wedding cakes for friends before long before I started doing weddings because I was just the friend who liked to make cakes.
Are you professionally trained?
No.
You're not, are you? So you're a self-taught home cook.
I am.
Which is quite amazing.
Thanks.
Isn't it though? I mean, you're catering weddings, you're doing big catering.
Yeah. I do loads of private events. I do loads of... I just really like food and I've been cooking my whole life.
Yeah.
I've been cooking since I was a kid. I cooked at home. And my catering partner, who I work with, is professionally trained. She went to Cordon Bleu.
Right.
She studied patisserie. She does most of our desserts and cakes and puddings because that is the thing that she is expert and beautiful at.
It's hard.
But I just really like making food.
Yeah.
And so I've kind of, if I've wanted to know something, I've gone and done a course, or I've, gone to learn how to, like I've gone to Tokyo because I wanted to learn more about miso and about I've gone and done those things where you go into somebody's house and find out how to cook a thing. But that's more inspiration than going to train.
Yeah,
and
I get that.
I was never really in a position where I could afford to go and train to take a year.
It's incredibly expensive.
It's massively
Yeah, it's
expensive.
massively expensive.
And by the time I realised that it was a thing that I really wanted to do, it's never too late. It's obviously never too late, but it was too late in my, sort of the way that I'd set up my life was, well, who would pay my rent that year? I don't have the security financially to step back and go, okay, I'm going to retrain, I'm going to do a year. And so I just did this instead.
No, it's great. I'm glad you did. We're all glad you did.
Me too. It's really fun, and I'm kind of glad that, not that I think that training would have made me lose love for it, but I think that it's been really nice just to focus on the bits that I really like doing and the food I love making.
Totally. And the other thing you like doing, which comes across in the book, is anticipating the party.
I love anticipating.
So I love that section where you talk about, because we've all been there, or most of us have been there, when we were teenagers, the getting ready stage.
The getting ready for the party.
Where you're in your bedroom, you've got the right tunes on, you're doing your lipstick, you are absolutely gunning for the evening, thinking about who you might see, what you're going to drink, what your mate's going to be doing, what cigarettes you're going to smoke, blah, 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 in the 90s. Mm-hmm. Talk us through this anticipation of the party.
It is a
I love that
deep
bit.
joy. So there is a whole introduction in the book about this, which Caroline's obviously picked up on and read. And it is written generally, but it is definitely specifically about a party that I went to last year. This was the last essay that I wrote, and I wrote it because we had this party at Halloween last year, so almost a year ago, that it was the first party that I'd been to since everything had happened. And it was the first party, house party, doors are going to be shut, people are going to be dancing, there's going to be a table full of hodgepodge stuff that people have brought. It felt like the most sort of we shouldn't be doing this, but we're definitely doing it thing. And the biggest joy was just going I went to stay with my friends who have a flat in South London, went to stay with Ella and Tash, we got dressed together, we played loads of music as we were getting dressed. We all got in a cab to go to this party. We showed up at the party. The girl that I fancied was at the party. It was a great time. We just it was just the perfect house party. And I was 34 and I felt 16. And I was I didn't have this feeling when I was 16 because I existed in such a anxious, everything's going to go wrong. I'm not the person who's good at a party. And now as an adult, I don't care what people think about me in the same way. I just don't have that anxiety that I had as a teenager. I don't have the fear anymore. So I was just I'm going to have that feeling now. And it was just this magic moment of just going, yes, this is the party that I want to go to. This is the way that I thought feeling 16 would feel and never did. And I'm really glad that 34 did.
That's very cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
The other thing you talk about in the book, which I really, really love that you're so honest about, is you sort of say, I'm the person you want when everyone's crashed out on the sofas and the chill out music's going, everyone gets really hungry, all at 3 a.m. at the same time. What are you cooking in the kitchen for when that moment happens?
So I've never been a big drinker. It's never been a thing that's been big in my life. I can count on one hand. There's 2 mornings I've been hungover in my whole life.
Wow.
And yeah, it's not a thing that I just stop drinking. I just get to a point where I'm well, this isn't fun anymore. This is not a feeling that my body enjoys. I'm done. And sometimes I'll drink through that. It's twice. It's 2 pretty horrible mornings where I've been oh, this is awful. And why would people do this? And so I am always still sober at 2 o'clock in the morning when that happens.
Never me.
So that bit of the party when people are should we get a takeaway? I am the person who is still sober enough to go, yes.
You're checking how many eggs are in the cupboard.
Exactly. So we had, in my town, when you live in London, when I lived in London, or you live here, I imagine, you can get a takeaway. like late at night, you can get somebody to bring you something. Even if it's not the exact thing you want at that moment, you could probably get somebody to bring you something. I now live in a small town where you cannot get anyone to bring you anything after 10 o'clock at night. There is not a corner shop that is open. There is not a single thing that you can go and get after, I think it is 10.
Yeah.
10's like our real cutoff. And at Christmas a couple of years ago, there's a walk that you can do through our town, which is called the 12 Pubs of Christmas. I don't know if my friends have invented this or if this is an actual thing, but there are 12 pubs and you have to go and have a drink in each one across a day.
That sounds good.
On the 27th of December, everyone's like, yep, we're going to do this. We're going to start at the pub at the top of the hill.
Because we haven't drunk enough during the festive period.
So, but you're with your friends by that point.
Right.
It's like, okay, I've left the family for a bit and I'm going to do this walk. And it's not a long walk, but it's like a drink in each pub. And I had a whiskey in each pub.
Oof.
And then got home and I was like, still sober, I'm fine. And everybody else was absolutely tanked. And so I just look in the fridge and go, okay, what am I going to do?
Oh.
I always have eggs. I always have bread. So at a base level, you can do that.
You can do eggy bread.
You can do eggy bread. You can do like fried eggs on toast. You can do fried eggs with all sorts of stuff in the fridge. And loads of those recipes are in the book.
Yeah, they are.
Because I love that thing of getting home and just being like, the recipes in the book for that period of time are kind of, do you have some bread? Do you have an egg? Do you have some cheese? Do you have a thing?
This is the 3 a.m. stuff.
Right, 3 a.m. eggs, you know, Welsh rarebit if you're feeling particularly ambitious. Stuff that doesn't take you an incredibly long time because once everybody decides they want to eat now.
Salt, fat,
acid, heat, really.
Yeah.
But, you know, but sort of those 3 a.m. things, which is going to make everybody feel a little bit better in the morning, I think.
Better, you say, than they deserve to feel.
I think that they deserve to feel.
But not in an earnest way.
Not in an
earnest way, you don't say.
But just, yeah, better than everyone, I think. I think we all deserve to feel after 12 pubs of Christmas.
And you also talk about another great party in the book, which was your legendary 30th birthday party.
Yes. So my 30th birthday, during my 30th year of life and my 30th birthday, I was a nanny. And so I didn't have a space of my own. And I'd always imagined that I'd have this sort of massive dinner for my 30th. And ever since I was a teenager, I basically wanted it to be Babette's Feast. Because I was obsessed with that film as a teenager, and this is probably evidence as to why I was not very cool. But I was obsessed with that film, and has anyone seen it? Anyone? Yeah, some nods. Great. It's beautiful.
I've not seen it.
It is stunning. Okay. It's a gorgeous film. It's a beautiful little novella if you've not read it either. It's like, it will take you less than 30 minutes to read. It's tiny. And it is essentially about a French woman who is a refugee from France who ends up in the film, I think it's Denmark, and in the book, I think it's Norway. It might be the other way around. And she ends up there living with a group of puritanical nuns. And she then, because her name is still entered every year for a thing that used to happen, she wins the French lottery. She wins 10,000 francs. And this 10,000 francs is sent to her years after she's moved into this house with these women. And she decides that she wants to use the entire amount to make them this dinner.
Wow.
And so she never sits down and has it. She used to be a chef in France, in Paris, at this extraordinary restaurant. And she makes this meal for them that is a meal that she used to make in Paris. And they happen, in a way that would only work in a novel, they happen to have invited this man who once ate the meal in Paris. And so spends the entire meal being like, but this must be this dish that I remember from this time 10 years ago that I had in Paris, this extraordinary chef. Maybe she is here. And then she is there, obviously. But the dishes are mostly illegal now, or at least very tricky to make. So you can't have turtle soup because we can't eat turtles. So you can make a mock turtle soup if you like. But essentially what I've done is done exactly what I did for my 30th, which is do blinis and caviar and veuve clicquot, delicious. It's supposed to be quails and pastry, but I am not a person who could afford to put quails into pastry for the 10 of my friends that I invited to my 30th. So it's chicken thighs in pastry with leeks and with Armagnac and with pâté, and so it's like a pâté base.
Oh, wow.
And then it's a divine dish. And I think that the dinner party section in my book, I think, is my favourite because I do talk about the fact that I am very here for somebody who goes, I want a recipe for a dinner party that I can do when I get home from work. I want something that's not going to take me much time, that doesn't ask very much of me, that isn't hugely pressured, and that allows me just to spend time with my friends. And there are half that chapter is those recipes. They're not very tricky, they won't take you very long, and you can do them with your mates. And I am also here for the person who's like, I really like it when people tell me I'm a genius. When people tell me I'm the best cook that they know. When people tell me that they want to come to my house for dinner because it's really special and really amazing. And the first half of that chapter is for those people who want to do something a bit fancy, because if you're having a dinner party, you want to do something fancy and you want to do something that makes people go, wow, I have never had this sort of thing before. And so it's a nice collection of those sort of things.
I love that. Something for everybody.
Something for everyone.
I think I'm in the first camp.
Yeah, and I think, and to be honest, most of the time, particularly now, I think 5 years on from my 30th, I'm not sure if I'd do that dinner necessarily in the same way every time now.
But great that you did.
But great that I did. And, you know, I love that you can be a person who does both of those things, but who, like for my birthday this year, I did a roast chicken, because it meant that I just get to drink wine with my friends and have a roast chicken.
Some of our best food writers have done entire books
on chickens.
There's a reason for that.
Roast chicken, and there's a recipe for a roast chicken because I do think it is the perfect dinner party dish.
Yeah, I get that. Okay, I'm going to go. I've got a couple of minutes before I'm going to open to questions. So please, everybody, have a think about questions. Before I do, there's a question I'm itching to ask Kate. We're going to go from fancy to fantasy.
Yes.
Your fantasy dinner party? Because I just think it's such a good question.
It's such a good question. I should have guessed that this was coming.
Well, of course it's coming. You don't have to do 6, because 6 is maybe too many. 4 to 6, who would you have around the table and why? They can be dead or alive.
This is so full on. Okay, so...
Go for it.
I want Agatha Christie there.
Yeah.
Not only because I love her books, but because I want to have, like... This is the question you want to ask Agatha Christie, is like, where did you go for that week?
Exactly.
Like, where did you go? What happened? I just want to have a chat, even if she doesn't know.
Just when you're stirring
just
something.
When I'm stirring something, just like
hole.
bring her into the kitchen for a bit and be like, tell me what happened. What happened
She'd
that
tell
week?
you.
I know, I think she would too. So I would want her there. I'm currently reading Alphabet for Gourmets, so I want MFK Fisher there because I want to talk to her about food. And I do think she writes a lot about people not inviting her around for dinner.
I think she's a bit serious.
I think she's a bit serious. But
don't put her next to Agatha.
I won't put her next to Agatha Christie, obviously. But I want her to be there because I think that she would, you know, she'd write about it well.
She'd wear a black polo neck.
She'd wear a black polo neck. She would, I've not cosplayed her, that's not what's happening. I've just realised, yeah, exactly that. Who do I want here there who's real? The problem is, my friends are fantastic. I have really good, clever, funny, brilliant friends who I always want at my dinner parties. And it is really hard not to then just go, and then I will have all of the people who I love and who I want to dinner all the time anyway. So I'm not going to do that because it's too easy.
Too easy.
And I get to have dinner with them all the time anyway. So that is good and fun. I'm going to reserve my final 4 or 2 until the end.
Okay, good.
Because I want to think properly about it rather than commit to more people.
All right.
I should have thought about this. I knew this
No,
was going to happen.
good. We're going to look
I really want to think about it.
to the others at the end. In the meantime, we've got about 12 minutes left, so I'd love it if anyone in the room has any questions, because we'll have them online as well. Does anyone have any questions in the room?
We do have a live stream question to start us off, to give
Yeah,
everyone another
Brilliant.
moment to have a think. So a question from Ursula. What's a recent book you've read that has a great party scene/vibe?
Oh, nice.
That is really good. So recently, the books that I think... So there's a book that opens the introduction, which is called One Last Stop. So I am a massive fan of the vibe of a romance novel. Just absolutely love it. Casey McQuiston's books, Red, White and Royal Blue and One Last Stop, are both party books. They are full of people going out and having a great time. And the parties are like sometimes dinner parties, sometimes barbecues, sometimes house parties, sometimes like massive balls, sometimes enormous like New Year's Eve parties. It's some of the best party writing I've ever read. They are 2 recent ones.
Party writing? This is like a genre.
Yeah. They are 2 recent ones that I would say are amazing. And then like a classic one, I think Michael Cunningham's The Hours is like heartbreaking and beautiful party writing because it's you are anticipating this book party for the entire book, and I'm not going to tell you what happens if you've not read the book, but it is like, I think about that party probably once a week.
Wow.
It's extraordinary.
Very cool. I'm going to just jump in.
Please.
Because I'm not going to let this evening go past without talking about another thing
That
we've
was
been
not
celebrating.
a deliberate
No.
lead-in, but
there's
yeah.
amazing news in the book world. I'm an ex-bookseller, so I follow the trade news. And last week, my jaw actually dropped open and I was like, oh my God, this is the most amazing news. Kate, tell them. What's the news?
I am writing a romance. Well, I have written a romance novel that will come out in spring 2024.
The trade has announced it, so we're allowed to talk about
yes,
it.
It got announced last week. So
sounding romantic gay book.
Set in Bristol. Contemporary. It's the most fun I've ever had writing anything.
Everyone's raving about it. It's going to be massive. So you heard it here first.
You. It is, it's been a deep joy to write in a way that I had not anticipated. And it's a deep joy to have people read it and be living it, which has been, I sort of was writing it for 5 months without ever telling anyone about it. And so to have people read it now and talk to me about it is just the nicest thing in the world.
It's an amazing thing, Kate. I'm
you.
absolutely
Thank you,
stoked,
Caroline.
as your native people would say. It's an amazing piece of news.
Thank you. It is mad.
It's brilliant. We've been talking about this all evening in the pub beforehand, so we're very excited about it. Anyone else got any questions for Kate about parties or any of her other books, about fiction that's in the books?
There is another live stream
Great.
question, and it is about the book, new book.
Oh, really?
So, question for Kate. I know you've got a rom-com novel coming out at some point. Congratulations.
Thanks.
This is from Catherine.
Thanks,
and
Catherine
asks, do you have any plans for a food-focused novel? Or I guess then perhaps I could add, or is food a focus in the forthcoming novel at all?
So in the novel, yes and yes. So
Good. Okay.
The second one, I think, so I signed a 2-book deal, so I know there's going to be another rom-com after this first one. And the second one is far more food-focused than the first one, so it's kind of specifically food-focused. I don't know if I'm allowed to say what it is, but
don't give too much away.
I'm not going to give too much away, but it is more foodie. But the first one, because I love scenes that happen around dining tables, I love bringing people together, I love what that sort of food writing does. I love that you can have people interact in a way that you can't really get everyone together in a scene unless they're sort of sitting down eating, just because of the nature of the way we all live.
Yeah.
It's really hard to make people be in the same room for a scene unless they're sitting down eating together. So there's loads of food in the book.
And the book is called?
Experienced.
Experienced.
But it's not a deliberately foodie book. There's just a bunch of food scenes because I think about food all the time, and it was impossible
Kate,
not to.
we'd be disappointed a little bit in a quiet way if there wasn't some food in it.
I also think I'd be quite disappointed. I'd be like,
where's
what are you
the food
doing?
gone?
Where's the food? So there's there's definitely food in it. It's a lesbian book set in Bristol. There's loads of food.
It's going to be brilliant. Can I ask a quick question? I'm
Please.
being greedy, but what's the best hangover food?
Ooh, well, not
If you've
for
got
me,
hungover
obviously.
mates,
If
what
you've got-
do you cook for them?
Well, so this is where my deep Australian vibes come out, because Vegemite is the best thing in the world.
Yes,
And-
probably. No. We've got some
We've
disagreement at the back.
got some dissension in
Is
the
it
ranks.
more Marmite?
It's nothing like mine.
Nothing like that. Is it salty crisps? What about crisps?
Sorry.
No, but what about crisps? Because I find crisps to be the ultimate
I think crisps are
Salt and vinegar
extraordinary.
crisps.
I just
you know,
think
in a sandwich. or-
salt is a great
It
thing.
needs to be salty.
But I think that I accept your hatred of Vegemite, and I see it, and I'm not with you, but I appreciate.
Is it on toast for you?
It is on toast.
Yeah.
It's on like very buttery toast. I think you need a carbon salt, basically.
Exactly.
So I think you're right with crisps as well. I
Salt,
think
vinegar, crisps,
chips
cheese
are good.
baguette.
I think
Can of
that is a
Diet Coke.
perfect.
I'm pretty experienced on this front.
There you go. I think you need full fat Coke.
No.
I think you
Too
need
sweet.
the actual sugar.
I agree. Well, there we are.
There you go. This is so. Yeah, I think
Next time, you.
basically salt and carbs, I think, is what your body needs in that situation. Salt and carbs and like...
A rest.
Yeah, paracetamol and water.
Netflix.
Like, embrace the fact that you actually have to take care of
Write
it.
the day off.
Yeah, write the day off. I did finish the edit for this book with my only hangover that I've ever had. So I had one more day to finish it. I wasn't supposed to get hungover. I wasn't supposed to get drunk. And my friend, I had this very strange, fantastic thing where I met a friend online. We were talking through the pandemic. He and I read a lot of the same books and we wanted to hang out. And so I was like, just come for dinner, that'd be great. And he came for dinner in February when the massive storm happened and ended up having to stay for 48 hours because all the trains were cancelled and he couldn't get back to Birmingham and nothing could happen.
Tester.
So we just had this like absolutely incredible kind of first date where we just had 2 days in each other's company when we couldn't do anything. We couldn't leave the house, it was flooding, it was like, there was nothing you could do and nothing was open. So we just got drunk on the first night, got over it the second day and then got up the third day and had a nice day. But yeah, it was a really nice moment. But yes, that was the time that I had to edit the book.
Wow.
So if there's any mistakes,
We'll put it down to that.
blame Phil and martinis, because that's what it was.
Martinis.
Oh, hell.
Never 3.
No. Oh, it was like 8. Like it was. I
Doesn't drink,
This
8
is the thing.
martinis.
This is the thing. I really think I deserved it. I did not feel good, and I absolutely deserved not to.
I know the feeling.
Yeah.
Right. Any other questions?
Hi.
Lady there.
Yes, please.
So you had the Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe in there. Which is the party scene that you've got in this?
So
in that?
in this one, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe is actually part of the tea party section because it's my favourite tea party. Because Lucy going to that house and having basically what would be my dream afternoon tea, which is something on toast, a cake, and tea. So she has sardines on toast, buttered toast, a cake, and tea, a dream. So the tea parties chapter opens with that section.
I love that.
Yeah, oh, a dream. And also the sardines on toast, one of my favourite shoots in the book. Like, it's one of my favourite photographs. It is sort of, the moment we took it, I was like, that's exactly how I wanted it to look. It just is precisely what I wanted it to be. And it's 4 different ways of having sardines on toast because I adore sardines on toast.
I've got time for one more question. Lady there.
Do you ever read amazing writers or great at writing, but you think, God, you really don't know your way around a kitchen?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yes. Yeah, I think there's a weirdly famous example of this who's Iris Murdoch, whose writing I adore. And I think The Sea is an extraordinary book, but that woman has never been in a kitchen in her entire life. And I read into this because I did an interview on the BBC about it ages ago because I just think it's so incongruous that the book is so full of food and it's also full of dishes that in no way could work. Like, it's not just that they're bad, it's that they're sort of physically impossible. So she talks about a poached egg inside scrambled eggs, which is not only disgusting, but as somebody who did try to make it because it was in a book and I was like, maybe it's great and I'm really no, it just doesn't work either. You can't get a poached egg that's kind of runny and it's awful. And so she sort of famously, apparently, asked her husband and he would just throw things at her and she put them all in the book and I think he was trolling her because none of it works and it's all nonsense.
That's so funny.
So Charles Arrogate, who's the sort of central character in this book, just has the weirdest diet of kind of extraordinary bonkers things and none of them work. And so she is one who I'm like, why did you choose to write so much about food if you knew literally nothing about it?
It's the sensuality of it, isn't it? It's
And
the
it is.
physicality
well,
of it.
And in this one, it's very much that he eats alone. So all of his meals are alone. He's kind of obsessed with this woman along the coast. He wants to be with her. She's there with her husband. The book essentially ends with them being like, well, I guess that's it. So this man is alone all the time. And I think very much part of the story is like him eating these meals all on his own and how weird these meals are. But loads of them are just beyond weird into like physically bizarre and nightmarish. So she is one where I'm kind of like, what are you doing? You don't have to do this. Yeah, my next book, exactly. The terrible food in fiction.
I love that.
Yes. So and you know there are also deliberately terrible meals in fiction. So meals that make people ill or meals that poison people or do any of those things. But she's one where I'm like, I kind of think you were trying, and you failed. But she succeeds on every other level, so it's fine.
Right, thank you for that. That was a great question. We are out of time, but before we finish...
Oh, God, yeah.
Have you had any further thoughts?
So what I've done is not thought about it for that entire time, which is an absolute nightmare.
But you probably have your friend Ella, wouldn't you?
I would, but I said
about
I was banning myself from doing that because
Okay.
actually I would just have that dinner party. Who I would actually love to have, which is this is weird, and it's only because then I get to talk to her. I don't know if she enjoyed food, but I have an ancestor who was a convict, who went over on a ship, who was 16 when she stole an apron and a watch from her stepmother and was turned in by her father. And she was put on a ship out to Australia at the age of 16.
Wow.
She had a terrible time on the boat on the way out, and when she reached Australia, tried to run away, realised there was nowhere to run to, and came back, and then was taken to Tasmania. And she is
That's where the hardcore convicts...
The hardcore convicts
all she
went.
did was steal something, and this is often the story, isn't it?
It's exactly
Someone
that.
stole an orange, they ended up in Tasmania.
Yeah,
like a...
exactly.
Yeah.
So she is in a book called Notorious Strumpets of Van Diemen's Land, which I think is the coolest book title in the world. And I am like deeply fascinated by her. We have a drawing of her in the docks because there's and we've got the court transcript of everything that was said at her trial. It's the amazing thing where if your relative did something that required them to be in court, it's actually a really useful way of having a family history because all of it's documented. So there's so much of her that is recorded history, and she is deeply fascinating. But probably, maybe, I'm making an assumption here, not a lot of fun. I don't know.
Who knows?
Maybe she is a lot of fun.
But she'd deserve a lovely dinner.
She would deserve a lovely dinner. And also, somebody who is in a book called Notorious Strumpets, I want to meet her.
Absolutely.
She sounds fun. She sounds like
this
at
is
least...
a good note
So
to
yeah,
end on.
I think she'd be cool. I
Thank
want
you,
her.
Kate. I
Thank
love
you.
that. Let's all give
you.
Kate a warm...
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.